Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive in 5 podcast. I am recording this episode the day, maybe 2 days before my period is due, and there was a time when I would have gone, oh, TMI, not sure I really want to share that, but honestly, I don't think your period should be something you are ashamed of. I think so many women feel squeamish talking about their period, talking to their partners about it, asking them to go pick up tampons or whatever, but let's be honest, so many of us have periods, so many of us deal with not just periods, but everything that goes with female hormones and female health, and we should be talking about it more because it does impact our lives in so many ways. And I'm going to talk about it today primarily in terms of how it impacted me from a weight loss perspective, but there's some other stuff in here that in some future episodes we might get into in terms of the impact of your hormones on other areas of your life, because it is absolutely massive. And understanding your cycle and understanding how you respond at different phases of your cycle is an absolute game changer when it comes to weight loss, but also when it comes to just having a better relationship with your body and a better relationship with the people around you as well. Because there was a time for me when my menstrual cycle used to massively disrupt me. Actually, scratch that. It used to ruin me. It was awful. I really, really struggled. And so a little backstory here. I was on the contraceptive pill for years. I first went on the pill when I was about 13. I started my periods when I was 11, and by the time I was 13, my mum was like, we're going to have to put you on the pill, because I was not particularly promiscuous. If you saw a picture of me at 13, you would not think that at all, but because I was just in agony. I was having to miss 2 or 3 days of school every month because I was throwing up, I was passing out, I was couldn't leave the bathroom. It was really, really bad. So at the time, going on the pill was the best choice for me. And I was on it for maybe 12, 13 years, something like that. And I came off it when I was in my mid-20s because for a number of reasons. One was a sort of health reason. I wanted to kind of understand what my body was like without all those kind of exogenous hormones in it. I also wanted to experience my body as it was. I wanted to know what my body actually was like in terms of my cycle. I wanted to feel a little bit more in touch with myself. There were also some sort of health reasons coming off it in terms of my IBS. My mum had cancer, and I was sort of thoughtful about if the hormonal contraception was a risk factor. But I'll be honest, one of the biggest drivers for me coming off the pill was I was told that it might help me lose weight. At the time, there's a lot of stuff going around on social media saying that coming off the pill could help you to lose weight because the pill caused weight gain. And I was like, well, I've been fat my whole life, but ever since I've been on the pill, I've been overweight. So maybe if I come off the pill, that's going to make losing weight easier. And it took a little while, I'll be honest, for my hormones to kind of re-regulate and for me to find a new normal. But pretty much straight away, as my cycle started kind of coming back, I started noticing a bit of a pattern. The first 2 weeks of my cycle, once I'd got through the first couple of days of my period, everything felt good. Life felt fine. Weight loss felt easy. I could stick to my calories, no bother. I could get in the gym and I felt good. I always felt kind of a little bit more energized. I felt like I was sleeping better. I felt more positive, more upbeat. And that's very common. That's your follicular phase. So that is once your period starts, that's day one of your cycle. Day one of your period is day one of your cycle. And at that point, your levels of estrogen begin to rise. And estrogen, it kind of makes you feel all of those things. Kind of everything just feels easy and you feel kind of on it. You feel kind of attractive and confident because estrogen is the hormone that's in there to kind of lead up to ovulation, and your body wants you to feel sexy and hot around ovulation because it ideally wants that egg to go and get fertilized. Ovulation happens at around day 14 of your cycle, and something that I noticed pretty soon after coming off the pill, I could actually know pretty clearly in my body when ovulation was happening because I would get a very particular set of symptoms. I would get some pain in my abdomen, I would get quite nauseous and feel quite sick, and my energy levels would suddenly drop. Quite noticeably, I'd have a day where I was like, I feel flawed. And I'd feel really flat, I'd feel really low. And that was when all this trouble would start. That was when all the struggles would begin for me, because then I'd get into the luteal phase. And this is where progesterone takes over. And this is the hormone that sort of thickens your uterine lining, as though the egg had been fertilized. And this is the hormone that sort of leads up to the start of your period. What kind of happens in the second half of your cycle is your your levels of progesterone kind of peak, and then as you get into PMS, or premenstrual syndrome, PMT I think it's sometimes called, I think it's premenstrual time, never really called it that, but that kind of pre-period week, that's when your levels of progesterone and estrogen are dropping off, and you get this real rush of symptoms. And it was in that second phase of my cycle that I would really struggle, particularly that PMS week. So early in my cycle, kind of pre-ovulation, even, sort of the third week of my cycle, I could do it. I could stick to my calories. I could eat well. I could exercise. I could make good choices. I felt like I had willpower. I felt like I had energy. And then I'd get to sort of day 20, day 21 of my cycle, and PMS would hit. And suddenly everything felt so much harder. I would have really kind of extreme cravings for things. I'd be sitting there and I could almost sense like the biscuits calling my name, or I would find that I was really just could not be bothered around food. Like all of the good kind of, if I eat that, it's going to make me feel good and it's going to align with my goals. All that went out the window. All I wanted was like pizza and crisps and ice cream and Chinese food and just stuff that was not going to align with my diet, but also wasn't going to leave me feeling great. Pizza and Chinese food, as much as I love it, as an IBS girly, not so good for me. But I had this real, I just could not stop thinking about having those sorts of foods. I also was insatiably hungry. I could not feel satisfied and full. I felt like my stomach was constantly at that point right before dinner when you're hungry. It just felt like nothing would fill the gap. My sleep would get really rough. I would be knackered every morning, but I wouldn't actually be sleeping properly. And that, I think, contributed to a lot of the cravings. My mood was, Harry still has to deal with this a little bit. I get very anxious and emotional in that sort of PMS time. I get very, I would cry at dog videos, or I still do this now, or kind of panic about stuff that wouldn't otherwise panic me. And all of that made weight loss really hard, because one of the things that would happen is around my period, the scales were not my friend. Around my period, I would find that I would gain maybe 2 or 3 pounds on the scales. Now, I know now as a coach and as someone whose job this is and as someone who's been through this before, that 2 or 3 pounds is not body fat. It is not body fat. It is water retention, it's inflammation, it is my digestion changing. My digestion will get quite rough around my period, and so that would often play onto the scales. But in my mind, it was body fat. And because I was feeling so anxious and emotional and stressed out, that would lead me to kind of completely spiral. I was the least emotionally equipped to deal with that spike on the scale, and that was the time that I would see it. And because I didn't really have an awareness of what was happening, I would end up hitting the fuck it button big time around my period. I would end up eating more than I wanted to. I wouldn't necessarily always start with a binge. I'd be like, I'm hungry, I'm going to have a little bit extra food here, I'm going to have some extra chocolate. But then I'd feel guilty about it, and then I'd get on the scales and I'd see the scales had gone up, and I'd be like, I fucked it. I've completely fucked it. What's the point? And then I would hit the fuck it button and have a binge. I'd skip the gym because I didn't want to be in there because I felt gross, I felt bloated. I'd stop going outside and doing my steps. I would just take my tracker off and be like, well, if I don't know about it, it's not happening. I'd bury my head in the sand big time. And when my period started and I really was all crampy and uncomfortable, I would sack off workouts completely. I would just eat chocolate and feel sorry for myself and kind of hole up and wait for it to pass. And it was literally 1 step forward and 3 steps back. I'd have maybe 14 days of the month where I was really on it, and then I'd have 14 days of the month where I completely fucked it, and I'd end up losing weight in that first 14 days and then gaining it all back in the second half. And it was all because I was not approaching it in the right way, and I didn't have the tools to deal with what was going on in my body. And the worst part about this, on reflection, when I was writing this episode, this was something that I'd kind of forgotten about, but I now remember it, and it was really bad, was at the time I was working with I'd worked with a couple of succession of male coaches or PTs, and they just did not get it. So I'd sit there and say, I'm really struggling, I'm so hungry, and they'd be like, well, you just got to kind of get on with it, it might be harder this month, but you should dig in, don't make excuses, it's not an excuse, it's just your period, that was one that used to get me, or it's just PMS, it's not real. I had one coach who genuinely said to me, it's not real, it's all in your head, which, well, yeah, it was all in my head, it was actually happening in my body, but it was still real. All those things were still happening. I still felt all those symptoms, that anxiety, that hunger, that stress, that sickness, all of that stuff was happening. It was incredibly unhelpful, Because yes, like, you can work through your period. There are ways to manage your period, and your period doesn't have to derail your progress. It doesn't have to mean that you do what I did and go 1 step forward and 3 steps back. But that whole, like, just get over it, just crack on, like, it's no different to any other week, it's no different to any other time of the month, that isn't the answer. There is a better way to navigate your cycle instead of just pushing through the misery every single month. Because in all honesty, that's often not possible, particularly if you do have a more extreme cycle. You know, if your cycle is uncomfortable, or if your cycle does impact you mentally in the way that it does impact me. And that's why at the TFP we will have strategies to help our clients manage their period in a way that actually works for them. Because let's be real about this, right? I actually googled this stat. 26% of the world's population menstruates, because it's not 50%, because obviously you've got children, you've got women who are postmenopausal. It's not some like niche thing though. It's a huge part of life for 50% of the population. It is a huge part of life at some point, and right now it is a huge part of life for 26% of the population. And if weight loss only worked when you weren't on your period, that would be absolutely ridiculous. The fact is, a lot of nutrition science and a lot of weight loss science is designed by men who don't understand. Basically, who haven't researched it, who haven't looked into it. There is not a lot of research done into it. Weight loss doesn't have to stop just because you've got periods. The two are not in conflict. And that's what I'm going to go through a little bit tomorrow. I'm going to talk about some ways that you can manage your period and the ways that you can think about it differently. If you are struggling with your cycle and it is impacting your weight loss, know that there are ways to manage it, and you can catch the next couple of episodes where I'll be going through those. But don't suffer in silence. Don't just suffer through. If you are struggling, please pop me a message. My Instagram profile is in the episode description. You don't have to suffer. Please just reach out and we can have a chat, and I can kind of offer some more personalised advice for your particular situation. But it doesn't have to hold you back. I will catch you in the next episode. Have a good one, and I will speak to you soon.